there's been quite a few developments over the last 24 hours. You mentioned it. First of all, reports that the FBI now has images from other cameras on Nancy Guthrie's property. Remember, we first only saw the images in the video from the Google Nest camera right on Nancy's front door. We were wondering, because we knew there were other cameras, one on the side, one in the back near the pool, and we are learning now that the FBI was able to obtain images from those other cameras, but here's the catch. It's not video, it's actually only thumbnail images. So every time motion was detected, apparently a thumbnail image was created, and that is what the FBI had.
At first, it looked like the investigation was slowing down. Fewer search teams, fewer headlines, less visible urgency. But according to investigators, that silence doesn't mean the case has stalled. It means something else entirely. Because behind the scenes, the direction of the Nancy Guthrie investigation has changed, and not in a small way. It has shifted from searching the desert to focusing on something much closer. And if that shift is real, then one question immediately comes into focus. What did they find that made them stop looking everywhere else? The Catalina foothills is not the kind of place where strangers move unnoticed. The roads are quiet, the homes are spaced apart, and most people recognize the vehicles that pass through their neighborhood. It's the kind of environment where routines don't just exist, they define the entire rhythm of life. Which is exactly why what happened here never made sense. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, lived a quiet, predictable life. Evenings were consistent, movements were familiar. There were no sudden changes, no unusual behavior, nothing that would suggest risk. And yet, sometime during the night, that routine was broken in a way that still hasn't been fully explained. At 1:47 a.m., the home's camera system stopped recording. No warning, no gradual failure, just a clean break. Then came the 41-minute gap. No footage, no movement, no sound. And at 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker recorded its last signal. After that, nothing. That window has been at the center of everything. Investigators, analysts, even independent experts have all returned to the same conclusion. That gap wasn't random. It was controlled. But here's where things begin to shift. For weeks, the investigation focused outward. Search teams moved through the desert. Drones scanned the terrain. Attention turned toward the possibility that Nancy had been taken far from her home, possibly even across the border. But recently, that focus has narrowed. And it's narrowing towards something very specific. A location. According to reports, investigators have returned to a nearby property not to conduct a general search, but to examine it with precision. This wasn't a routine revisit. They weren't asking broad questions. They were looking for something in particular. And when that happens, it usually means one thing. New information has entered the case. Because in investigations like this, you don't go back to a location unless something points you there. So now the question becomes, what changed? What did they learn that made that place matter? In neighborhoods like Catalina foothills, proximity is everything. People don't just pass through unnoticed. Presence has a reason. There's always an explanation for why someone is there, whether it's a resident, a worker, or someone connected to the area. Which is why one detail is starting to stand out more than anything else. An unoccupied house. At first, it doesn't sound important. Houses sit empty all the time. People move, properties get listed, tenants come and go. But in this kind of environment, an empty house does something unusual. It disrupts familiarity. It creates a space where movement is harder to track. A vehicle parked outside doesn't immediately raise concern. Someone entering or leaving doesn't stand out the way they normally would. And if someone needed to be close to Nancy's home without being noticed, that kind of location becomes very useful. Now, investigators haven't publicly confirmed exactly how that property connects to the case, but what they have done is return to it, and not casually. They are reportedly examining who had access, who had reason to be there, who could have used that space without drawing attention. Because once you start asking those questions, the investigation changes. It's no longer about what happened that night. It becomes about who had the opportunity to make it happen. And this is where things get more precise. Investigators are no longer just looking at physical movement. They are analyzing digital presence, mobile signals, Wi-Fi connections, device activity in and around the area during critical time periods. Because even when someone tries to disappear, devices don't always cooperate. Phones search for networks, Signals connect and disconnect. Even brief moments of activity can leave behind traces, tiny fragments of data that, when combined, begin to form a pattern. And patterns are what investigators rely on. If a device appeared near Nancy's home during that 41-minute window and also appeared near that nearby property, that's not coincidence. That's proximity. And when proximity starts to repeat, it becomes something stronger. It becomes direction. Now think about what that means. If investigators are shifting from a wide search to a narrow focus, if they are revisiting specific locations, if they are analyzing presence instead of possibility, then the investigation may already be moving toward a conclusion, but not one they're ready to announce. Because cases like this don't end the moment a lead appears. They enter a different phase. Verification, matching data, confirming identity, building a case strong enough to hold. And during that phase, something very important happens. Things go quiet. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. Fewer updates, less movement, less visibility. But inside, the pressure builds. Because once the investigation narrows, every detail matters more. Every signal, every movement, every person connected to that area. And right now, everything seems to be pointing in one direction. Closer. Not farther. Not into the desert. Not across the border. But back toward the place where it all started. And that changes the entire way this case is viewed. Because if the answers aren't out there, then they've been close the whole time. And that raises a question that investigators may already be asking. If someone was close enough to watch, close enough to move without being noticed, close enough to understand the timing, the routine, the environment, then how long were they there before that night even happened? And, more importantly, are they still closer than anyone realizes? If you want to follow how this case unfolds and see how these new leads connect as more information comes out, make sure you stay with us and subscribe, because the next development in this investigation may not expand the search. It may finally reveal who it's been pointing to all along. And that's where everything changes. But the more investigators focused on that nearby property, the more the case began to shift in a way that wasn't immediately obvious. Because it wasn't just about the house itself. It was about what that house made possible. In a place like Catalina Foothills, most movement is predictable. People leave for work, return home, follow routines that rarely change. That consistency is what gives the area its sense of security. But an empty or recently vacated property breaks that pattern. It introduces uncertainty. And when uncertainty enters a controlled environment, it creates opportunity. Investigators are now reportedly looking beyond the idea of a single moment the night Nancy disappeared, and instead examining what may have happened in the days or even weeks leading up to it. Because if someone used that nearby location, it likely wasn't for a few minutes. It would have required time. Time to observe, time to learn, time to understand exactly how that neighborhood worked. And that's where this starts to become more deliberate. Think about what would matter to someone planning something like this. When lights turn on and off? When someone is alone? Which doors are used regularly? How long the house stays quiet at night? Those aren't details you figure out in a single visit. They come from watching. And if investigators believe that kind of observation took place, then the case is no longer centered on a sudden event. It becomes a process, a build-up, a series of quiet steps that led to that 41-minute window. But there's another layer to this that makes it even more complex. Because while physical presence is one part of the equation, digital presence is another. And unlike people, digital signals don't rely on memory. They rely on records. Investigators are now reportedly analyzing device activity across multiple timeframes, not just the night Nancy disappeared, but before it. Because if someone was monitoring the area, they wouldn't just appear once. Their devices would show patterns, repeated signals, recurring connections, small digital footprints that, on their own, might seem meaningless. But together, they form something much more powerful: consistency. And consistency leads to identification. Now, here's where the pressure starts to build. Because once investigators begin cross-referencing device activity with known individuals, people who had legitimate reasons to be in that area, the list starts to narrow. Residents, contractors, service workers, anyone with access or a reason to be nearby. And in cases like this, proximity isn't enough on its own. But proximity combined with pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Which brings us to another detail that has quietly entered the investigation: construction activity. In residential areas like Catalina Foothills, construction crews move in and out regularly. Trucks are parked along the street. Workers pass between properties. Tools are carried in and out without raising suspicion. It's normal, which is exactly what makes it useful. Because someone moving through the area under that kind of cover doesn't stand out. They don't need to explain their presence. They don't need to hide in the traditional sense. They blend in. Investigators are reportedly reviewing not just companies, but individuals connected to that activity. Names, schedules, access points. Because if someone was using that nearby property and also had a reason to move around the neighborhood freely, those two elements begin to intersect. And when they intersect, the case moves closer to something tangible. But even with all of this, there's still a problem, because evidence in this case hasn't been straightforward. It's been fragmented. Physical clues pointing in one direction, digital signals pointing in another, ransom messages adding confusion instead of clarity. At times, it has felt like multiple stories are unfolding at once. And that raises a difficult question. Is all of this connected, or has someone been deliberately creating noise? Because investigators are also dealing with something else, something that complicates everything. False signals, messages demanding Bitcoin, claims about Nancy's location, contradictory information that shifts from one version to another. At first, those messages seemed like potential leads. But over time, their inconsistency has forced investigators to consider another possibility: that some of these signals were never meant to help. They were meant to distract. And if that's true, then the real trail isn't the loudest one. It's the quietest, the one built from patterns, not claims, from presence, not messages. Which is why the investigation appears to be moving away from public-facing developments and deeper into analysis. Less about what is being said, more about what can be proven. And that shift changes the timeline. Because once investigators begin working at that level, cross-referencing data, verifying identities, narrowing possibilities, the process slows down on the surface. But underneath, it accelerates. Every piece of data is checked, every connection is tested, every assumption is challenged. And at some point, those pieces begin to align. Now, consider where this leads. If someone had access to that nearby property, if they were present in the area over time, if their digital footprint overlaps with critical moments, then the investigation is no longer asking broad questions. It's asking one very specific one. Who fits all of those conditions? And once that question is answered, everything else becomes secondary. But there's one more detail that investigators can't ignore: timing. Because everything still comes back to that 41-minute window. The moment the cameras went dark, the moment the data stopped, the moment Nancy disappeared. If this was planned, and everything is starting to suggest that it was, then that window wasn't just chosen randomly. It was calculated. Which means whoever was responsible didn't just understand the environment. They understood timing. They knew exactly when to act. And that level of precision doesn't come from chance. It comes from familiarity. Familiarity with the house. Familiarity with the area. Familiarity with the routine. And that brings the investigation back to its most uncomfortable possibility. That the person responsible wasn't just nearby. They were close enough to know, close enough to prepare, close enough to wait. And if that's the case, then the real question isn't just who was in the area that night. It's this: who had been there long enough to make that night predictable? Because once investigators answer that, the case doesn't just move forward, it narrows. And when it narrows far enough, it stops being a mystery. It becomes a name. And that's the point where everything changes. But there's still one piece missing. Because even if investigators are getting closer to identifying someone, there's still the question of what actually happened inside that 41-minute gap. And that part of the story may be the hardest to uncover. But even as the investigation narrows, and even as the focus shifts towards specific people, specific places, and specific patterns, there is still one part of this case that refuses to fully come into focus. Those 41 minutes, because everything points toward planning, toward control, toward someone who understood exactly what they were doing. And yet, inside that window, there is still no direct record of what actually happened. No footage, no sound, no confirmed sequence of events. Just a beginning and an end. And that gap has become more than just a missing piece of evidence. It has become the center of the entire case. Investigators believe that whatever happened during that time wasn't rushed. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled. And that assumption is based on everything that came after. The condition of the house, the lack of disturbance, the precision of the digital shutdown. All of it points to one possibility. Nancy didn't leave in confusion. She was removed with intent. But here's where the story takes a turn that is harder to confront. Because if everything was planned that carefully, then something may have gone wrong. Experts have started to consider a possibility that doesn't rely on speculation, but on reality. Nancy was 84 years old. She relied on a pacemaker. She needed stability, routine, and controlled conditions. If she was taken out of that environment suddenly, unexpectedly, her body may not have been able to handle it. And if that happened, even early, then the entire situation changes. Because what may have started as one type of plan could have quickly become something else entirely. That would explain a lot. The inconsistent messages, the shifting claims, the difference between demanding money and later offering information about a location. Those aren't the actions of someone following a clear plan. They are the actions of someone reacting, trying to adjust, trying to regain control of something that may have already slipped beyond it. And if that's true, then the 41-minute window may not just be where the crime happened. It may be where the plan collapsed. But even with that possibility, investigators are not relying on theory alone. Because while the physical trail may have faded, and while the digital signals may have gone silent, there is still one area where the case is very much alive: the lab. DNA analysis has become one of the most critical parts of this investigation, but it hasn't been straightforward. The samples collected are mixed, multiple contributors, layers of biological data that are difficult to separate using traditional methods. Which means investigators aren't just waiting for a match. They're waiting for the ability to isolate one. Technology capable of separating those layers, identifying a single profile and linking it to a real person. And that process takes time. But it also represents something else, a second chance. Because even if mistakes were made early on, even if evidence wasn't handled the way it should have been in those first hours, DNA doesn't rely on memory. It doesn't rely on assumptions. It relies on what's there. And if the right profile is pulled from that data, it doesn't just suggest a direction, it confirms it. Now, combine that with everything else: the narrowing investigation, the focus on proximity, the analysis of digital patterns, the return to specific locations, all of it moving toward one point. And when that happens, cases like this don't stay unresolved forever. They reach a moment, a point where the evidence stops expanding and starts converging. And when it converges, it leads to something very specific. Not a theory, not a possibility, a person. But until that moment arrives, the case exists in a state that is difficult for everyone involved. Because from the outside, it looks quiet. No arrests, no major announcements, no clear resolution. But inside the investigation, the pressure is building. Every day that passes adds urgency. Every piece of data becomes more important, and every unanswered question becomes harder to ignore. For the Guthrie family, that reality is constant. Because while the investigation moves through data, patterns, and analysis, for them, it is still about one thing: what happened to Nancy, and whether there will ever be a clear answer. As of now, that answer hasn't come. There is no confirmed suspect, no official conclusion, only a case that has evolved from a disappearance into something far more complex. A case about timing, about assumptions, about how a single decision in the early hours can shape everything that follows. And maybe that's the part that stays with people the most. Not just what happened that night, but how close the truth might have been from the very beginning. Because if the person responsible was nearby, if they understood the environment, if they had time to prepare, then this wasn't something that appeared out of nowhere. It was something that developed quietly, close to home. And that leaves one final question. Not about the desert, not about the signals, not even about the 41 minutes, but about something much simpler. When investigators finally identify the person behind this, will it be someone no one expected? Or someone who is always just close enough not to be noticed? If you've been following this case, share your thoughts below. because every perspective matters. And if you want to stay updated as new developments come in, make sure you're subscribed. Because this investigation hasn't ended, it's getting closer. And when it finally breaks, everything we thought we understood about this case may have to be re-examined.